Hello, everyone, and welcome to Yamhill County Truth Seeker. I'm your host, Todd Butterfield. Have you ever had your local newspaper refuse to print a letter to the editor that you slaved over and wrote and turned in? I have. Now listen, I love having a local newspaper. In McMinnville, Oregon, it's the News Register. Always great stories from Starla Pointer. Fair and direct reporting by Scott Unger and Paul Dacalante. And I'm sorry, I don't read the sports stories enough to be able to say anything about the work of the sports writers, but I'm sure those are probably really good too. News Register newcomer Kirby Newman Ray has stayed until recently on quite harmless topics himself, very delightful. And the photographers, maybe you've noticed, they do an excellent job as well. But more often than not, I've had problems with two things in that newspaper. Number one, Nicole Montesano's reporting, and I'll talk about that in a future show, and editor Steve Bagwell's choices on the opinion page, or the editorial page. And right now, I want to focus on a censorship tactic of the editor of that page. I say tactic because I only know of one incident of what I'll call censorship when he would not print one of my letters to the editor. Yes, even though it was way back in 2021, it's still a thorn in my paw. My guess is that many other people have had their letters censored as well. Now, when you get censored, the feeling is kind of awful because, first of all, no one knows that it happened, except you. And you put all that effort in, and you really felt it, and you wanted to make a difference. And you can't help but feeling violated by having your freedom of speech canceled. Now, I realize that editors likely have discretion over their newspaper, and they can say which letters go in or out. And it's probably not a First Amendment issue. Regardless, here's what I said in the letter. Why don't you listen and read and see if you think it's so offensive that it just cannot go to print? I said, Ron Wyden and Amy Klobuchar are in an HBO documentary that you can watch on Hulu called Kill Chain, the Cyber War on America's Elections. Trust me, it's riveting and chilling. Wyden and Klobuchar, among many others from Congress, voiced their distrust of the hackable voting machines that are being used virtually everywhere. Oregon, anyone? Without God's comforting presence, I would be in greater fear not only for our country, but for most nations around the world. The ramifications of extensive fraud are much worse for average citizens than you might imagine. Draw your own conclusions. For me, there is enough doubt to warrant not only the forensic vote audit currently winding down in Maricopa County, but most other states. So far, 20 states have sent delegates to the Arizona audit to see if it is a good idea for their own state. After watching the documentary, you may agree with me that anyone who fears or tries to stop an audit gives the impression of exposing their guilt in advance. God grant your grace to America. The News Register's editor replied to my email. I asked, will you print it? Did I miss the deadline? Here's some of what he said in response. No, because it makes connections that are simply not supportable. It perpetuates the big lie that got Donald Trump banned from Twitter and Facebook. That an election he lost by 8 million votes was somehow stolen from him. The concern expressed by the senators was to foreign government hacking, the most credible threat of which was Russian hacking on behalf of Trump. It remains a threat, of course. There is not a shred of credible evidence to tie the senators' generalized concerns from years back with anything that occurred in the 2020 election. This is just pure nonsense. Sorry, but we aren't going to be party to it. Well, Steve, my concern about the machines was worth publishing in the McMinnville paper in 2021. And why not let others rebut my letter in public? The documentary Kill Chain, the Cyber War on America's Elections, was not only about foreign involvement in our elections. Let's listen directly to some actual dialogue from the first 3 minutes of the documentary. Hari Hursty says, I keep hearing that the system is unhackable. Bzz. Wrong. Everything is hackable. Always. These are just computers. We call them voting machines, but they're nothing more than obsolete computers. Amy Klobuchar says, it's not just about hardware. It's the hardware of our democracy. Hursty says, we tend to see these events as random and disconnected, but in fact, there is a pattern you can see. In cyber warfare, it's called a kill chain. We may be buying the world's best 20th century military when the battlefront on the 21st century is election security, cybersecurity. We have to understand how broken the system is and what are the fundamental problems we are facing. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. This is our common problem, owned by everyone living in the United States. And we have to solve it in order to preserve our way of life, our society, the rule of law, and our right to self-govern. Whoa, that is pretty significant talk, Mr. Hari Hursty, who happens to be a renowned expert in cybersecurity. I believe the documentary, beyond a doubt, proves that voting machines are hackable, and they actually show people doing it. If you are willing to watch this documentary, which, as I said, was not produced by conservatives, you will see that the machines cannot be declared safe and secure, as so many in the media continued to do over the last several years. Mr. Editor, I said nothing about the 2020 elections in my letter that you would not print. My emphasis was specifically about the valid question that I have about voting machines and the reason we should have transparent audits. The HBO documentary was released in 2020. Tying it to the so-called big lie, as you said, is a false flag and a distraction and just plain in error. Remember also that in my letter to the editor I said, draw your own conclusions. If you who are watching or listening to me right now have letters that have been censored by the News Register, feel free to share them with me, and we can perhaps air them on this show. Speech should remain free, after all. I would like to say that, with the exception of virtually every political cartoon that Mr. Bagwell chooses to print, and only the occasional editorial that he writes that is overtly left of center, Steve is a very good writer and does some very deep analysis that is really good for our county and our city and is surely integral for keeping our paper alive and vibrant. So thank you for that, Steve.
Voting is our capability to have a peaceful transfer of power. If you don't have that, the alternatives are revolutions.
We call them voting machines, but they're nothing more than obsolete computers.
2002 is when they put them in service.
A commonly used argument, they are never connected to the internet.
No voting machines are connected to the internet.
Not connected to the internet.
Not connected to the internet, and therefore cannot be attacked.
Oh, it wants to go to internet. That's very nice.
In 2016, we know that Russian actors targeted state election systems.
When people say no votes were changed, it misses the point.
Imagine you go in and flip the digits of everybody's address.
When you prevent people from casting a ballot, you've hacked an election.
Hackers are a wonderful resource. Every voting machine in this room is in use in next election. We are here 3 days a year. The real adversaries, they run it 24/7 with massive funding.
We are in.
Hari takes it personally when people do stupid things with technology. What do you think the security pin is?
They upgrade to 111111. That was not a joke.
We may be buying the world's best 20th century military when the battlefront is election security.
I had full access. I could have changed any vote.
It's called a kill chain. Weaponization, paralyzation, when the governments cannot take action, that's when you finish the target.